Well, the elections are over and it's official. In January, President Biden is going to be retiring. But the question is, do you know what the right time is to retire for you? Stay tuned this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome to Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, here with my good friend and co-host Sarah Samuels. And today we're going to explore this topic of how do you know when it's the right time for retirement?
Dave, it's awesome to be here with you, of course, and with all of our listeners once again. And this is a really important topic because a lot of people want to know when is the right age to retire, or what's the right amount of money I should have in my account that'll make me safe to retire. But it comes down to two real important sides here, the emotional side of it and the financial side.
Yeah. And it's hard to tell when to retire. We try to avoid politics on this show whenever possible, right? But a great example is in the case of President Biden, right? He didn't know when to retire, right? And everybody else around him said, it's time, right? And sometimes that happens. So you're right. Part of it is really, okay, are you still enjoying what you're doing? What are you moving toward? What does retirement look like? Have you thought about that? You run the risk of being bored in retirement because you're kind of a workaholic and you haven't put together a retirement life plan, not just a financial plan, but a retirement life plan. Or, on the other hand, are you ready to get out and you want to retire early? Also money, right? Have you saved enough? Sometimes you may not have saved enough and now you have to work part-time. What does that look like? Or you have saved enough and you can retire at any time, but now you're wondering, when is that right time for me? So today, sir, I'm looking forward to exploring this topic because it's a topic that people really struggle with. We think about it. You come to work your entire life and you're young, but you work, you get a paycheck every year. You make a little bit more than you did the previous year, and costs go up of goods and services, but you still save and invest some money. You spend the rest. It's what you get used to doing. Now, imagine doing that for another 30 years. Then all of a sudden, one day, you're just going to give up that paycheck.
Right. It can be difficult. It's hard to wrap your head around that concept, especially if you don't set goals heading into retirement, if you don't really think about what your day-to-day life will look like in retirement. It can end up being miserable or boring for a lot of people that don't plan ahead the right way to retire.
It's an important life change. It's just like a life change for people who get married or people who are married who get divorced. It's a life change for people who have children that become empty nesters, right? You have to get used to what that new chapter of life looks like for you. And retirement is perhaps the biggest transition of all the ones I just described.
Yep. Well, let's get to our Ask Dave question. We have a great question here from Ray in South Carolina. Ray says, I'm 57 and I've saved a good amount of money, so I'm thinking about retiring soon because my profession is really not what it used to be, and I'm afraid I'll be bored.
Okay, Ray, 57. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't know what Ray does for work, but 57, I'm going to think maybe he's a school teacher, because I hear a lot of teachers today say that. And they say the education has changed a lot. And I also know in most school systems, 30, 35 years of service, you get full pension.
Right. So a lot of teachers look forward to that because they know that they'll get that full pension, which is pretty rare these days.
So Ray, I could be right, I could be wrong. I don't know. But my question for you is, what are you moving toward? Okay, your current work is not what it was. But do you have so you're moving away from something? And I will tell you, Ray, that I find people who retire and enjoy retirement are not people who are moving away. They're people who are moving toward. They have a clear vision of what retirement looks like, and they're moving toward this vision as the next exciting chapter of life. So, Ray, the question I have for you is, what are you moving toward? Do you know what you're moving toward? If you don't, then I would say retirement is not a good option yet. So you need to take some time and plan for that. And stick around. We're going to talk later on in the show about how to plan for that, how to determine what you're moving toward in retirement. But, let's say you have enough to retire, but, let's just take the education example, right? It's not what it used to be. Well, there's still things that you can do potentially in the educational world that don't involve being a full-time school teacher, right? So you're right now in some grade level, whatever you're doing, you can still educate in different parts of the world. You can educate part-time. You can educate as a temporary fill-in instructor when teachers are sick. What's that called, Sarah? I forget.
A substitute
The
teacher.
substitute,
There
thank
you
you.
go, yes.
So you can still work and keep busy and do what you do while you're trying to figure out what retirement looks like for you. Because again, I can't stress it enough. Those that retired are moving toward a vision of what retirement looks like are much happier and much more fulfilled than those who are simply moving away from a bad situation.
And Ray, thank you for sending in your Ask Dave question. If any of our listeners have a question maybe about retirement or goal setting, or when can you determine the right age for you to retire, please send us your questions via email to askdave@retirementincomesource.com. And thank you for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels, and I'm here with David Scranton as we are talking about when is the right time to retire. A lot of our listeners might be getting to that age. They might be thinking, hey, it's time for me to really consider retiring. But it's not just a number in your investment accounts. It's not just your emotional feeling. It's several different factors that really have to work together. And Dave, you just answered a question, an Ask Dave question from Ray, who was worried that his profession is, it's not really what it used to be, and he wants to retire to get away from something. But you mentioned that in your experience, the people that have more successful retirements are people that are moving towards something as opposed to trying to escape a bad job maybe or a bad boss.
Right, that's the thing. It's not just because your occupation has changed. Sometimes it's because the company has changed, the company culture has changed. Maybe it got bought out by a bigger company and it's different. It's not what you enjoyed before. Maybe it's a manager that's come on that's a complete jerk that you butt heads with, right? Could be lots of reasons you're moving away. But here's the reality, Sarah. A lot of people today include work in their retirement goal. And some do it because they have to, granted, but some do it because they want to. They want to stay mentally sharp. They want to do something, right? It used to be that people retired at 65 and maybe had a 10, maybe a 15-year retirement.
Right. If they were lucky, they would, 75 or 80 years old, and that was typically when people were passing away. But now people live 90, 100, over 100 years sometimes.
Right. So people had this thing, I'm going on cruises, I'm going to travel, I'm going to do all this stuff. Well, that's great if you're going to be retired for 10 or 15 years, maybe take up the first 5 or 7. But if you're going to be retired for 30, that's great for 5 years. Then you're bored. What do you do for the next 25? So a lot of people still include work as part of that. So, the key is to make work fun so that you still want to integrate it if you do. And sometimes it could be self-employed. Sometimes it could be consulting. It doesn't have to be, it could be volunteer work, sir. It could be something you're
Charity,
passionate about.
absolutely.
If you've saved enough money, it doesn't have to be for in exchange for pay. It could be something you're doing for the greater good.
Right. And especially for people maybe that were working with people previously, social workers, teachers, there are all kinds of programs out there where you can still work with children. You can still work with folks with special needs. You can still help and be productive in retirement. Your retirement doesn't have to just consist of sitting on the couch and watching TV, right? Or it shouldn't. We're hoping it doesn't.
Well, like in the financial world, right? I can go volunteer in any senior center in America and help people with their budgets and their Medicare choices, which that's a bad example because I don't know as much about Medicare choices as I should. But I mean, help out a lot. So there's always something in your field that you can help with. But the most important thing is to make sure that you're moving toward something. Now, we gave a few examples just now where maybe still doing some work is part of your retirement goal. But what if it isn't? What if it's just having fun and retirement in the purest sense? Well, if that's the case, then stay tuned. I'm David Scranton here at Sarah Samuels, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today's show is all about helping you answer that question, when should I retire? Because a lot of factors go into it. It's not just the financial component, do you have enough money saved? It's really the emotional component. Are you actually ready to retire? And we've talked a little bit about this idea of moving towards a goal in retirement and how it's always going to be more successful to do that, move towards something, as opposed to move away. But Dave, what are some other ways that people can get started setting their goals for retirement?
Well, I think you just said it properly. It's goal setting is what it is. And sometimes people don't spend enough time goal setting, right? They react. So you graduate from school and you work for a while, you save some money, maybe you want to buy a house, and then you get married, and then you pick out the house, you buy the house, and then next thing you know, there's a child on the way, and oh boy, I better save for college. And maybe you're living off one income, and now we really got to save for college. And you get through college and think, I've got 10, 15 years to retirement, I'm behind. And so you're not really dreaming about what your life entails. And that's unfortunate. I mean, I think people should set goals at all stages. But retirement is a chance to push the redo button, the reset button. It's a chance to say, okay, maybe I've reacted through my life. Maybe I had big goals and ambitions as a child, and then all those went to the wayside just because of how the twists and turns that life had taken. And now I'm ready to retire. It's a great chance to get in this new chapter and design your retirement, right? If you've saved enough money, design your retirement. So I recommend you sit down with you and your spouse, significant other, and you go through a process. You take time thinking about all the things that you want to do in retirement. And you write about it. You brainstorm. I mean, this may take several days. You get away, you shut your phones off, you get away from the house. Ideally, you go somewhere that's inspiring, right? Some place that you like to go, that you enjoy. You go there together and get an Airbnb and hang out and just say, okay, let's do this. Let's write about our goals. And it could involve some traveling. It could involve, of course, things with the family. It's going to involve that. It could involve some work or volunteer work, right? But you start to really paint the picture of what gets you excited. And at the beginning, if you're like a lot of people, it's hard, right? Because your entire life you've done what you've had to between, saving for a house and taking care of the kids and then saving for retirement, that, maybe you put yourself on the back burner. Maybe you came last. But now it's time to put yourself first. And if you haven't done that, if you're not used to that, if you're not a selfish person, it's hard sometimes. But give it some time, and in time it's going to get easier, and you're going to start to get a very clear vision of some of the things that really excite you and that rejuvenate you. And for you that are married or in a relationship, it brings back those juices, that sense of excitement of, hey, the things that we've always wanted to do together, maybe we talked about early in the courting stage, but we never really got to do. So go through the process, take it seriously, do it while you're working. So when you step into retirement, you know what you're stepping into.
That's one of the most important things about retirement. Oftentimes, you don't just want to go into retirement cold turkey, right? You want to prepare and practice for it. And our next Ask Dave question actually has to do with this idea. We have a question from Alyssa in Florida. She says, "My husband and I really struggle with the concept of retiring. Some of our friends are retired and they love it. Some of our other friends that are retired don't seem to be enjoying themselves. So, what makes the difference?"
Well, Alyssa, I don't know who your friends are. I suspect a lot of it has to do with those that are moving toward versus moving away, that were moving toward a pleasurable retirement versus those that are moving away from, a problem. But even then, I've got within my own client base, Alyssa, people that were workaholics and they retired and they enjoyed it completely and still enjoying it. And I've got people that lived their entire lives to retire and then retired and were bored and miserable. So, Alyssa, what you can do is you can take those people, your friends, and you can interview them. Okay? Go and talk to them and say, look, what is it about retirement that you enjoy so much? What is it you do? Did you plan for it in advance? How's it changed from your initial vision, right? Interview them almost as if you're a roving reporter, right? You're trying to do an article or do a news piece on retirement. Then go to the people that are not happy and say, what parts of it do you think you're unhappy with? Is it boredom? Tell me. Maybe talk to them about if you had to do it all over again, what would you have done differently? That's a great question. You can get a lot from people when you ask them what they've done in retirement that they like, that they're happy about. What would they do differently if they had to do it all over again? And again, so live vicariously through those that retired and were happy and joyous, and live vicariously through those that weren't. So hopefully you can learn those lessons in advance, learn from the mistakes of others, and have a pretty darn fun, enjoyable retirement yourself.
Yep. And Alyssa, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave email. If any of our listeners have a question that you would like to submit to the show and maybe have your question answered on a future episode, all you have to do is email us at askdave@retirementincomesource.com. And thank you for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we hope that today's show is helping you answer the question, when should I retire? What's the right age for me to retire? How much money do I need to retire? And Dave, we've talked about how it's always going to go better, really, for you if you're moving towards something, towards your goals, as opposed to moving away from goals. And I think your advice to our last Ask Dave question about interviewing people was great advice, because some people enjoy retirement because they're happy, happier, more optimistic people. Maybe other people that aren't enjoying it, maybe a little bit more negative. But I do think that if Alyssa goes and talks to her friends, she will find that the happier people are those that have their goals, they have plans. Maybe even a few years from now, they're saying, yeah, we have this trip planned. And 2 years from now, they have a forward thinking mindset.
Yeah, it's important. And part of it is, in fact, I just bumped into a friend of mine recently. He's in his early 80s and used to work for me. And he retired late 70s. So you'd think it's time. But he actually says, truthfully, I'm a little bored sometimes during the day. I go play golf a couple days a week. I go to the gym in the morning, go play golf a couple afternoons. Yeah. The other afternoons, though, what do? I'm not going to play golf every day, right?
It can get boring. You need activities, you need hobbies, you need things to fill that time.
Yeah, and that's why. So, we talked about going through a goal-setting process, right? We talked about interviewing your friends who are retired and what they like and what they would have done differently, but also practicing. How about practicing retirement? We've talked about that before, Sarah, on the show, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can practice retirement now. You don't have to retire first. You can still be working, but you can figure out what will work for you and what you enjoy, even if you think maybe you want to live somewhere else in retirement. We've talked about that, where you actually go maybe stay there for a month even to see if that's really a place you want to live full time.
Yeah, hopefully by the time you get close to retirement, you have more time off from work. Maybe you even have some accumulated vacation time, and you could take a whole month. 1 or 2 weeks doesn't typically do it, but if you can string together a month worth and you can go someplace and you can practice retirement and see what it's like, now you get a good feel for it. You might find that, by the fourth week, happy hour doesn't start at 5 anymore. It starts at 3 in the afternoon. And then you think, okay, Houston, we have a problem. I better find something to do in retirement.
Then it starts at noon, and then you're okay. Yeah, maybe we need to.
I want to be going to meetings every day, right?
Exactly.
So that's why practicing makes sense. And again, you can do that several years before you retire by accumulating that retirement time, trying to put it together and trying to take trips and do different places, do different things, and even staycations. If you plan to retire where you live, just take the time off and stay there. Yeah. And then what does that look like, right? So again, a great strategy.
Yeah. When my mother-in-law actually was thinking about retiring, it's funny you mentioned a company buying out a company, taking it over. That's what happened with her company actually, and that was one of the reasons that she was looking to retire. But it took her about a year to really practice retirement, this concept, to really think about what it would look like. And now she's been retired for a year and a half, and she loves it. She has a plan for every single day. She's out there gardening, but she said, "Hey, sometimes you don't get everything done that you wanted to on your list. You can't be too hard on yourself, but it's important to really practice it so you're not just going into this whole new mindset cold turkey."
Well, it's funny because, people will say things like, how do I even have time to mow the lawn when I was working? I'm not sure how. I don't have time to do it right now. And that's a good thing. If you hear that, that means, or if you're saying that or thinking that, it means you did a good job. And if you're interviewing somebody and they say those types of things, it means they've done a good job filling their time in retirement with something that is fulfilling for them.
Yep. Well, hopefully you figured out a way that you can make sure you're covering that emotional aspect of learning, when you should retire. But are your finances up to par? Are your finances, are you ready to retire when it comes to that? We're going to discuss that coming up. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and the goal of today's show is to help you answer this question: when is the right time for me to retire? So we've talked a little bit about the emotional aspect of retiring and ways that you can really prepare for that by interviewing some of your friends who have already retiring, figuring out if they have any regrets, anything that they wish they would have done. That way you can not have those same regrets when you retire. But of course, a huge portion of this, Dave, it's not just how you feel about retirement, it's if your investments are ready for you to retire. So
Yeah.
how can our listeners determine how much money they actually need to retire?
The formula is pretty simple. I think you start, first of all, there's two things you need to determine. One is what I call your I need retirement income goal, and the other one is your I want retirement income goal, right? So I need is really to live the same lifestyle that you have today. You want to figure out how much money that is to live the same lifestyle you have today. So now you're not going backward, you're not doing any harm, right? That's how much income you need. And then you got to look at your I want goal based on, doing the goal setting process that we talked about, maybe practicing retirement like we talked about, or talking to your friends who are, have retired, and the good, the bad, and the ugly from them. And then you figure out how much income you want, right? But then you've got to subtract from that your fixed income sources. So what are those? There's Social Security, right? Some of you might have rental income as an income source you can count on. Some of you might have an old-fashioned pension plan, right? The type that pays you a monthly income forever and ever and ever. And that's fine too. And then some of you, you have that. And then you go to your investments, right? So now you have the gap after you take your I need or I want goals, both of them separately. Subtract the pension, the Social Security, the rental income. And now this is the net that has to come from part-time work or investments. And how much can you take from investments safely? Well, I always talk about 4% as a good rule of thumb. Maybe you can squeeze it to 5% per year, but only if you're allocated properly, right? So that means if you have $1 million, you could take 40,000 of income and that's it per year. I use $1 million because it's a round number. Some of you may have more, some of you may have less. It's fine. 4%, and maybe you could squeeze 5% out of it in today's interest rate environment. But you have to be allocated properly. What does that mean? That means that as a regular listener, that total return has two components: income and growth. The income is the interest and dividends that gets paid out that you can spend in retirement, and the growth is when something appreciates in value, goes up in value. But you can't spend that, right? So when I'm talking about it, you have to be generating a 4 or 5% interest or dividend payment, getting that much from the I in order to even generate that much income. And that percentage is a lot less if you're generating less. So, Sarah, that is the basic formula.
Yep. Well, a lot of people, Dave, they still want that magic number, and you see these articles all the time that say, hey, you need, 1 million or 1.5 million and you'll be okay. And our next Ask Dave question comes from a listener who has a question about one of those rules of thumb you hear. So this question is from Daniel in California. He says, I read a lot of articles saying you can retire on around 60 to 70% of your job salary. Do you think that is a good rule of thumb?
All right, Daniel. Well, if you're a regular listener, you probably know that I'm not a big fan in general of these rules of thumb. And the reason is because, you're your own person. You have your own retirement goals. You have your own financial picture. It varies for everyone. So I try to shy away from those rules of thumb. So what can you do instead? Well, use the word need, right? We talked about I need and I want goals. So how do you determine your I need goal? Well, the way I like to do it is, again, my I need goal is defined as the amount of income that you need in retirement to live the same lifestyle you have today. So you take your income today, you start there, and you subtract from it the expenses that are going to go away in retirement. I call it the top-down strategy, right? Because that's one strategy of determining how much you need in retirement. The other one is what I call bottom-up. The other one is where you go through your checkbook and your credit card statement. You try to figure out where you spend money. And the problem with that is it's tedious and you miss a lot of things. But bottom line is what it feels like today to live on the amount of income you're living on. So if you simply take your income and subtract the expenses that are going to go away, that gives you the same lifestyle that you have today, right? So what do you have to subtract? Well, first of all, any 401k contributions, right? You're not going to be putting money in a 401k in retirement. Second of all, Social Security taxes, FICA tax. You're not paying that when you're retired. You only pay that when you go to work, right? Then, if you plan to have a mortgage paid off or a car loan paid off in retirement, subtract that payment because that also is something you're not going to have in retirement if you pay it off. Or, how about other savings? Let's say you're putting money in an investment account or in a Roth IRA or in a credit union. Well, you probably won't be doing that in retirement, right? So you subtract that. So you're, again, subtracting all the expenses that are going to go away, and that gives you your I need retirement goal. So I find that to be the simplest, quickest, and perhaps the most efficient and accurate way to do this. And don't go as far as saying, well, we're going to live with one automobile and my spouse and I are going to get rid of one. And if you start nickel and diming that way, then it's changing your lifestyle. So be careful. So anyways, I hope that helps. But stay tuned because now we're going to talk about in a moment about not just that I want goal, but really the fun part, the I need goal, the fun part, which is the I want goal.
Absolutely. Daniel, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave question via email. And if any of our listeners have a question that you would like to send in to the show, all you have to do is send an email to askdave@retirementincomesource.com, and you may hear your question answered on a future show. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we are talking about when is the right time to retire. How do you know if you've made that emotional transition, if you're ready psychologically for retirement? How do you know if your investments, if you have enough, if you've saved enough to be able to retire? And Dave, you answered a question just a few moments ago from Daniel, and I love when we hear about these rules of thumb, and I'm not a big fan of them either because, like you said, everyone is their own individual person and has their own unique set of circumstances. And I think if you start to worry about a rule of thumb or I should follow this concept, it can get really messy, and people can make wrong decisions.
Oh, of course. And just like investment allocations in your 401k, right? Oh, here's a rule of thumb. Well,
yeah, follow this index and do that. You know what I mean? It's better to really learn about all the different assets for yourself and to make your own decisions versus following the crowd sometimes.
That's right. And now in his case, we talked about, the I need goals. That was the question. But how about the I want goals, right?
This is the fun part, right? So you figured out your I need goals, right? You need food, shelter, these things. But what about what you want out of retirement? What about the fun things?
Yeah. And in fairness to that question, the I need goals oftentimes are 60 to 70% of your pre-retirement earnings because you're taking away the FICA and the 401k and any debts are going to be paid off and all that stuff.
That's probably where they got that number is you take away all of those things from the paycheck.
That's a reasonable number, but that's just your I need goal. But here's what I want you to realize, especially if you're a regular listener to our show, is that retirement means you're going to have more time on your hands. More time on your hands means you're going to want to fill it and do more things. Doing more things means it's going to cost you more money. So now you have to take all those things that when you did your goal setting, or when you talk to your friends that retired happily ever after, or when you practice retirement, right? These strategies we talked about just in the show today, when you do those things, that's going to cost you more money. And I will tell you, for most people, when you start to add those back on and you gross it up for taxes, because remember, you still have to pay income taxes when you're retired, you get back to, what you were earning pre-retirement, or maybe even more. A lot of people need the same amount or more to live the retirement that they really want.
Yep. And your goals might change too, as you move through retirement. You might have some of more of those lump sum goals in the beginning. Maybe you and your spouse want to purchase a vacation home or potentially maybe purchase an RV, travel the country, whereas later on maybe you don't have so many of those lump sum goals.
And that's true. Sometimes that happens early on, and anything you spend in a lump sum is money that can't be used to generate income from your portfolio, right? So that's fine. You have to factor that in. And what if you have all IRA money and 401k money? Well, then you don't want to pay for that stuff in a lump sum because any withdrawal you make from an IRA or 401k is 100% taxable. So, you have to pull out $10 to get $6 or $7 net. So then you might want to take a loan, then you have to pay interest on it and take income from the IRA or 401k to make those loan payments, right? So those are all things that factor into this. But also you realize that you're going to spend more money on income-based things early on in retirement. So coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about the phases of retirement and how you might spend more money on certain things in one phase, and you may spend more or less in the next phase, but it's just going to change. The expenses themselves are going to change, and most importantly, what you can do to plan for that. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. And welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and today we're talking about how you know when it's time to retire. And so far, we discussed how people who are moving towards something positive and fun, exciting and fulfilling in retirement tend to live a much more enjoyable and fulfilled retirement than those who are moving away from a bad situation. So, how to know emotionally when you're ready to pull the trigger, but also financially, right? We talked about how to determine how much you need in retirement for income, and then your I want retirement income goals. But now, Sarah, I'd like to talk just a little bit too about some different phases you have in retirement, because
there's different phases as you're entering retirement, right? We talk about the transition phase, that we talk about once you enter retirement, maybe after a few years, and then later on in retirement, maybe near the end of your life.
And you have to plan for inflation throughout that time, as people living longer and longer. Of course, inflation means that your baseline goes up. But there's different. A lot of people think, well, I'm going to spend a lot of money early on in retirement because, like our good friend Greg from Tulsa says, right? He calls it, you got your go-go years in retirement where you retire, you're traveling, you're doing everything, you're never home, you're having fun. Then, okay, been there, done that after a few years. Then you go from your go-go to your slow-go where, yeah, every once in a while you might do something, but you're
slowing down. You're getting older too,
You kind of fall into a pattern of contentment around your home and with family and everything. And then eventually your slow-go years go to no-go years where, even if you want a trip, you're going to give it away. You're not going to take it because you just don't want to do it anymore. So a lot of people think that means the go-go years are spending a lot more money, right? So I hear people say, well, I want to spend money up first. I want to spend money early in retirement, and then I'll spend less later on. Well, that's not necessarily true for a couple reasons. First, inflation, right? With inflation, you might find that you're spending the same amount in later years, even though you're doing less. But also, some of the fun expenses go to medical care.
Right. That's a huge one because we talk about all the time how healthcare inflation is much, much worse. It increases much higher than the state of regular inflation.
And I know you have Medicare, but you have Medicare Part A and B. Part B goes up. You got your Medicare supplement. That goes up. You probably have long-term care insurance. And there might come a point where you need, if you don't have long-term care insurance, where you need some home health care. You need people to come help you in your house. Maybe not medical, but maybe even something like, okay, I shouldn't be climbing on the roof anymore because of my age. To clean the gutters, I got to hire somebody for that. I shouldn't be mowing my own lawn, and when it's 90 degrees and humid in the summer, I shouldn't be. I shouldn't be cleaning the house. I should, so things like that. So you'd be surprised that the costs change from all the traveling and the fun and this and that to other things. So most of the time your costs don't go down necessarily from the go-go to the slow-go to the no-go. So you have to consider that, hey, your costs are going to stay the same and they're even going to go up with inflation.
Yep. Let's get into our Ask Dave question, which really deals with those transition years that I mentioned. So our question comes from Carol in New Jersey. She says, my husband and I are definitely retiring in 5 years. So what changes should we make now to our investment strategy?
All right, Carol. It was Carol, correct?
Carol, correct, yes.
Well, Carol, it's not too late, but I would say that in an ideal world, you would have started making some adjustments 5 years ago. Because I like to tell people you want to be about 10 years out of retirement and gradually start making transitions with your investments. And what are those transitions? Well, up until that point, and arguably up until now, you've been total return focused, right? You want to make money on your money. You want your accounts to go up in value. You don't care where that total return comes from, the income, the interest and dividends, or whether it comes from the growth, the capital appreciation, right? Because most investments have those two components in how you can make money, just like rental property, right? You have rental property, you make money because it pays rental income to you, and you could take that rental income and spend it or reinvest it. But you also make money when the property goes up in value, but you can't spend that. So earlier on, you just want to make money. You don't care whether it comes from the income or the growth. It doesn't matter. But as you're in retirement 5 years from now, you're going to care because you can't spend the growth. So that's when you want to be in an income first, growth second approach. You're not ignoring growth, but it's got to be income first so you can replace your paycheck, and then growth second for the future as an inflation hedge. But you want to start making that transition ideally 10 years out, right? Because you don't know what the markets are going to do. We know from at the turn of the century, from 2000 to 2012, the first 13 years of the century, the markets were underwater. Most growth-based investments were underwater. So even then, if you planned 10 years out, you would have been caught on your heels a little bit. The best time then would have been to plan 13 years in advance. Otherwise, you're caught underwater 10 years later. So I say 10 years is a good time to start transitioning to an income first, growth second approach. So why is it not too late for you? As I said when I first started answering your question, Carol, well, simple. Because the markets are still pretty high now. The markets are high, things are going well. So it's still a good time, but you have some catching up to do. So you might want to take some pretty concerted efforts in the next month or two to make some transitions to an income first, growth second approach.
Yep. And Carol, thank you so much for sending in your question. And if any of our listeners have a question about their retirement or maybe something you've heard in the news and you would like to ask the show, all you have to do is send us an email to askdave@retirementincomesource.com, and you may hear your question answered on a future show. You've been listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we are helping you answer that question, when is the right time to retire? Because it's the emotional aspect. It's also the investment aspect. You have to make sure you have enough in savings to be able to retire and to make sure that your assets can generate income the right way. And like Dave said, if you're, 15 years out from retirement, really start thinking about making that transition 5 years from now. So you have that 10 years to make the transition, because it's not like a light switch in the broker house, right, David? You don't just switch the investments over from a growth focus to an income focus.
It's a transition over 10 years preceding retirement. So it's those transition years. You're in the red zone, you're not quite there. And we all know in football, the playbook is different in the end zone from when you're on your end of the field, right? So because of that, the same is true in retirement. And, it's a hard transition for people to make, Sarah, because they're so used to not thinking that way. They're just so used to thinking about, whether your account has gone up or down from month to month. In fact, our same friend, Greg, I mentioned, who likes to say, go-go years, slow-go years, and no-go years. He's the one who says, also, it calls it the 401k brain. It's the mindset when you're working that, hey, I get my statement 1 month, it's gone up in value, I'm happy. It's gone down in value, I'm unhappy. And they literally pay virtually zero attention to how much is coming out in interest and dividends, how much is coming out of the portfolio in income. But that's okay, because during those accumulation years, you don't need to worry about that. But in your income years, you certainly do. But again, don't wait till last minute, because the fact that the financial markets were underwater for 13 years at the beginning of the century tells us it can what?
It can happen again, and it probably will happen again. We've seen it twice
at some point.
Yeah.
So if you get too far in that 10-year red zone and you haven't started making that transition, you're really starting to push your luck. And if the luck works against you and you get caught in one of those long-term downdrafts, you might have to postpone retirement for as much as a decade or more. And I don't think any of our listeners really wants to do that if they've already set their goals.
Yeah. I think the most important thing, Dave, is really transitioning your mindset, really wrapping your head around this ideal of the income first, growth second, and really that income, that interest and dividends, replacing your paycheck. And like Greg mentioned with the portfolios, once you're looking at the income, if your portfolio maybe it goes up and down, but if your income doesn't change, then you're in a good place. You're happy because you know that you have enough to pay for those things in retirement.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I'm glad you said that. I forgot to say that we talk about it all the time on the show, and I realize that people don't listen. Believe it or not, hard to believe, Sarah, but people don't listen to our show every single week. They do skip some weeks, right?
Well, they might. I hope they listen to the show, and you can always listen to our old episodes on retirementincomesourceradio.com. But some people don't listen to every single block.
Well, even last week we talked about assessing your risk, and I said, hey, you have to question if your account drops by 30%. Is that okay? But what's interesting is once you've made that transition to an income first, growth second approach, then if your account drops by 30%, it's not such a big deal because if you've done it the proper way, your income doesn't get reduced by 30%. Yes, you still have the emotional problem of having your account worth 30% less on paper. So, that may affect, mentally, emotionally, whether you feel like spending money, but your paycheck shouldn't have to change because the income component doesn't change. So that's half the battle right there, is making sure that you've essentially locked in, if you will, your retirement income.
And that's really the beauty of investing for income the right way, is if you've allocated your investments the right way, you don't have to worry. Your account may go up and down, but you can really feel comfortable knowing that you are still getting that income, that interest and dividends the right way. So thank you so much for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. If you would like to listen to this episode or other past episodes, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can check out our website, retirementincomesourceradio.com.
Please do. And most importantly, we hope that you're here with us next week, same time, same station. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and you've been listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.